then, I am back on with the E-Type Revenge. Now the reason I say back on, this has been a couple of weeks of pause for this, just waiting for panels. So on my first order, what had turned up was the rear passenger, which I've now welded into the car, and the front drivers. But I didn't want to go cutting up the other side until this side was completely buttoned up. It means that straight away I've got all my measurements, obviously, to compare side to side, but also I'm not risking the integrity of the shell actually twisting. As well as that, the floor pan here actually slots in between the inner and outer sill. It's sandwiched between them. And by waiting for that, you're going to get a much neater job. The interesting thing about that as well is, if you think if an E-Type's just had floors and not sills, that means that the sills have had to be cut open, opened up, the new floor slid in and then re-welded in. So it's a bit of a questionable job really of what is the right thing to do with this. But I've waited and now we're going to get this floor pan in the front. So this is a full-on take two moment. Now I was about to start putting the floor into the passenger side, or what's going to be the passenger side of the E-Type, and it just didn't look right. And I started moving it around and fiddling around, and somehow I ended up with two front driver side panels. So that is obviously the other side of it. So I've had to wait for the correct panel, which is this one here. Now I haven't actually done any more welding on this in the interim period. And the main reason for that is this next floor panel going in now will give the strength and the structure to kind of build off to go across the rest of the car. So I didn't want to start cutting and chopping at anything else until I finished adding the strength to this area. So let's get cracking. I'm going to put this floor panel into this side of the E-Type, and then I'm going to try and flip it up to get that chassis rail in. Okay, so that is all of the floor in on the passenger side. Now, I can't actually join it up to the tunnel because the chassis rail is completely missing. And this is where I've actually got some box section, which is the exact same diameter but a thicker wall to go in there. So what I'm going to do is measure up the front part of the chassis rail and kind of get some measurements to where it's going to sit, finish cleaning off the remnants front to back, and then I can weld that onto the centre of the tunnel, and I can join my floor into it as well. So this side then will have some major strength and structure to start to build off and into the rest of the car. Okay, so a bit of a change of plan with what I was doing there. I started chopping out to get my first chassis rail in, and as I was doing that, I was looking at everything and where things were going to go, and the plan was always to cut the tunnel out. That was always on the cards. What I was trying to do though is locate the chassis rail in the same place as they were, so that way I'm not altering the actual frame and the chassis and the monocoque body itself. However, what happened was, once I started cutting this away, I'd already got my line for the chassis rail on both sides. So I thought, why save this and kind of work around it? I've already got my measurements for the floor because the other side's in. I've already got my measurements for the sill, so I could just actually cut this out of the way and make this a lot faster. So all of this is now out. Now I've got my measurements for my chassis rail, so I can put my chassis rail in on my passenger side and weld my floor to it. and then I can start to work on this side straight away. So it has actually really sped the process up here, and hopefully it'll be more straightforward as well. But I'm really pleased that's out. It looks now like loads of progress in there. I know I've just got a big hole, but the progress is great on this car. So let's get the chassis rail in and have a tidy up. Here it is then, my new chassis rail, and the reason I keep going on and on about this is chassis rails are incredibly important in a car, and the fact that this had one entirely missing and the other one was deteriorated, it was honestly the breaking point for this shell of why somebody probably didn't repair it. That mixed with no sills and no floors, I get it. So this is going to be going in place. Now the other things I'm going to be doing are, I'm making it very slightly longer. So it will finish in the same location as it finishes here, so it'll match up and the kind of shell looks exactly as it should do. But I'm leaving an overhang further out the back. The reason being is, when I actually mount my rear subframe from the F-type in the back, it will have similar box section all the way around it to join it into this shell. So this actually having a bit of overhang, it'll give me a bit more meat and a few more possibilities. I can cut it off to length, but it'll make it easier to join the two different cars together in the rear end. So let's get this measured up, let's put it in place and get some tacks in and put some strength back in the shell. Floor is now in on the passenger side of the E-Type Revenge, which I'm absolutely over the moon about. The chassis rail has worked perfectly, front to rear, with a bit of overhang as well, and it has kept everything absolutely in line. I am over the moon with it, and it's just all of a sudden this has become a very tough, strong shell again, which is great news. So what I'm going to be doing next is moving on to the other side, where I'll be putting another chassis rail in and also the floor on there as well. But that is it for this episode of the Anarchy Garage. Thanks for watching and see you next time.